husband. So Lisa Matthews is my wife. She's been working at WMB now for 20 years coming up. We first attended WMB, I don't know exactly the year, I think it was 1989, but we believe we came to the very first dinner theater, if anyone remembers. Dinner theater, and it was just the dessert one, it wasn't the dinner one, and we were invited by Paul and Carolyn McElroy, so that's how we started attending WMB. But yeah, thank you, Gareth, for asking me to come speak. I'm going to try and just touch base on a lot of things when you're talking about finances and death and taxes. There's a lot of different things that happen. I just kind of wanted to explain a little bit about my professional background. I work with a team of 8 people at IG Private Wealth Management. There's 8 of us on our team. 4 of us are certified financial planners. The rest is my business manager and my admin team. Some of you might notice my daughter now works for me. Is that loud enough? Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah? Seems to be cutting in and out. My daughter here, Hillary, who actually got married here in 2019. So it's a neat little spot for us. The other thing I'd like to touch base on is there's a lot of misconceptions out there on who's a certified financial planner, financial advisor, financial consultant. The government and the regulators are getting this kind of under control. But as a certified financial planner, it's the highest designation you can have as a financial planner. And it's really important that you know that, so whoever you're dealing with, you hope has a certified financial planner designation, which means they understand taxes, they understand how to put a plan together. So I always like to go over a certified financial planner tends to put everything together in a plan, gives you an idea of what your tax liabilities are going to be, not only today, but in the future. But when you go to, say, a bank and you just see the teller or a financial advisor there, they have a tendency to say, oh, I have $5,000 for an RSP. They just put it in your RSP. Or if you come to me and give you $5,000, I have to figure out whether you should put $5,000 in, because I look at the tax brackets. So when you're dealing with a certified financial planner, it's kind of important. On the accounting side, there's some great accountants out there that help you tell you what you should do next year. But we do find a lot of accountants and tax preparers, they just take your information and go, here, this is how much you owe. They don't help you do something different the next year to try and reduce taxes. So that's kind of what our job is just to map out a roadmap of paying the least amount of tax going forward. So in retirement or any risk, when you look at all the risks that's out there, most of the questions we get when we're dealing with our family groups, and just to give you an idea too, we have 500 family groups that we look after, and we manage about $250 million in our group. And the very first question anytime we're talking about someone retiring is, how long are you going to live? Ted touched base on this. Longevity risk is a risk. When we're doing financial plans, we do kind of look at till 90 years old. Sometimes it's 95. The stats out there of how much everyone's living longer, if you're a couple and you're both past 65, there's a 65% chance that one of you will make it to 90. So when we're doing financial plans, we look at it that you're going to live to at least 90 before we take you to the moon. Inflation risk, obviously we all felt that since last spring with the cost of food. That's a part of the plan that needs to be involved. You always want to make sure that whatever money you need also increases every year with inflation, so you don't lose any buying power. Secrets of return risk, I'm not going to get into that today. That's more on the financial planning and just kind of how the market works. Interest rate risk, hopefully none of us have any debt, but if you do, you've been feeling the effects of this. The Bank of Canada raised the rate again yesterday. We are being told that that's it. And more than likely it is it. They're trying to curb inflation, obviously, that's at 7%. But now our kids or grandkids that own a home are going to feel the effects of this, because it's basically tripled since last January. Now, when I say tripled, that scares people, but it's really was 2%, now it's 6.7%. But all of us in the room remember the 80s and that 21 and 18% when we bought our first homes. I think 6% still is not too bad.
Yeah.
So it's all relative. Unfortunately, our younger clientele have never seen this. It is going to affect their, obviously, monthly money. They might be coming for you for some extra cash as they renew their mortgages. One of the mistakes that we believe the Bank of Canada has made with these raising of interest rates is most economists will tell you it takes 4 to 18 months to get through the economy every time they raise an interest rate. The Bank of Canada now has done 8 of them in the last 12 months. So where do they push us? Yeah, they pushed us towards a recession, but I'll get that in a second. Market risk, obviously, if you're in the market, you felt the effects of that last year as well. We like to let all our clients know that out of a 10-year period, you're going to lose 3 years, but you're going to gain 7. So a 70% chance of winning. It's just important to know that when you're doing your financial plan, and I'll get into this in some of the planning later, but market risk is obviously something you're concerned about. Opportunity risk we won't get into today, but tax risk. Ted touched on it briefly about the capital gains tax. One area we have been hearing that is going to change is that inclusion rate. Right now, capital gains is taxed at 50%. We have been hearing for the last 3 years it's going to be changed to 75%. And I don't know if everyone remembers this, but in the 70s it was 75 and they lowered it to 50 to stimulate the Canadian economy. Someone has to pay for the money that the government has spent, so the way they raise money is always through taxes. Ted also talked about the principal residence that they're looking at, taxation. The information we're hearing is there could be some taxation on a principal residence, but we believe they're going to be limiting it to how long you've owned the home. So if you've only owned the home under 5 years, we believe that's where we're hearing it might be taxed, but if you've owned your home for 30 years, there won't be a tax situation. But who knows? When they're looking at these things, you just never know until it's official. Just to talk about what's out there in the world, Ted talked about, we all know our homes with real estate really jumped in the last 2 years. We know about inflation. And with this inflation, with them raising interest rates, that's how the government controls inflation, but now they pushed us towards a recession. And what that means is they've slowed the economy down because the interest rates are so high, so businesses don't want to grow or build because it's too much money on interest. So they slow the economy down, and now what we're hearing, by the summertime we expect interest rates to start to fall because they've pushed us towards this recession. So the way you'll always know about how banks feel about interest rates, you can ask Jonathan, he tends to know, but when you look at the GIC rates, normally the one-year GIC rate's lower than the 5-year GIC rate in a normal world. Currently, it's the opposite of that. The 1-year GIC is higher than the 5-year GIC rate, which means they expect interest rates to go down. They don't want to give you a higher rate for 5 years when they know that the interest rates are coming down. So we do know that we don't know if it'll ever get back to where we were a couple years ago at 2%, but they will come down. And then what else happens in the world? Obviously, the war in Ukraine scared a lot of people last spring when that started. The market tends to react quickly about that, but it also tends to quiet the noise. I always tell people 20 years ago when a president spoke, he would affect the market that day. Well, in the last 10 years, we don't see that very often now. The politicians can say what they want. The market reacts now to actual good data, and it's important to know that you don't want to get most of your information from social media or any media because they tend to drive fear, right? Fear sells, right? So it's important not to get your information to, like Ted said, from your friend at Tim Hortons that you meet with once a week, your neighbor. It's important to actually get the facts from some professional and just make sure you're always making the right decision. We briefly talked about market conditions. One thing I always like to say, GIC rates never seem to match inflation, so we don't have it part of our planning unless you absolutely have to. On the market side, we're on calls once a week, so basically what we're hearing from our economists, our fund managers that run BlackRock and McKinsey and PIMCO. They're kind of telling us that the recession's already been factored into the market. The market tends to factor in things that are looming. So our concern for a lot of our clients last year is we had a drop almost of about 30% by September in the market. Then they started to hear the word recession, and they thought it might drop another 30%. Well, the market's already factored that in. We do expect to hear the next 4 to 6 months to be a little bit what we call bumpy, but after that, we do expect the market to have moderate growth. Political conditions, I briefly talked about that. The nice thing sitting in my chair too, we get a lot of data. When the war broke out in Ukraine and Russia, we got all the data from every world war, starting with World War I, and we saw market conditions. And it's amazing how resilient the market is during the World War, because when Ukraine started, the fear was it's World War III. And obviously that didn't happen, but that was the fear. So when we did see that, it was really interesting to see all the data on the history of any war that was happened worldwide and how the market reacted and how quickly it came back. So something you don't have to really concern yourself with, but it is important to obviously look at it. And like I said, media drives fear. In retirement, obviously we have what we like to call buckets, and that's all your different accounts and different areas that you could get money from. Obviously, the government benefits, CPP, Canada Pension Plan, as well as old age security or government benefits that we receive. On the right-hand side, you could also have a pension from a place that you worked, as well as you could have what we call LIRF or LIF. I think in the room today I'll talk about LIFs and RIFs instead of all LIRs and RSPs. GIFs is just a guaranteed income fund that some people have through insurance companies, guaranteed money for life. Sun Life was very good at selling those in the past 15 years, and it's just a different type of fund. Hopefully everybody has a tax-free savings account open, and once that's full, we actually look at non-registered accounts that Ted briefly talked about. And then on the other side, when we look at assets, you could still own a property. We call it wealth insurance, and that's whole life insurance because there's a cash value inside it. Sometimes you can use that in retirement. You can pull the cash out if you need it, and or it just grows tax efficiently inside that. Some of you might own a corporation or still have a holdco. You might have inheritance that we'll talk about maybe a bit later in our panel. I'm going to have Ted come back up just to discuss inheritance. And then obviously the last one in big bold letters is taxes. That's not an income source, but it's something you have to put money in when you retire. Just to touch on the two government pensions, Canada Pension Plan, that's a contributory pension plan, so you've put money in and your employer has put money in. There has been some changes in that now, so the younger generation is actually putting in more than we did. 4.95% is what we used to put in. The employer matched that, so 9.9%, but now it's changed to 5.95% for each person and 5.95% for each employer. It's important to know that when we look at the average Canadian, the maximum CPP and how they calculate this, it's 32 years if you maxed out your CPP contribution, you would get the maximum benefit. And it's all based on an income threshold. Currently, this year it's just over $60,000. But we have a lot of people that don't understand it. You can get a Canada Pension Plan statement on the CRA website that will tell you exactly what you're going to get. We do that for all of our clients before they retire because you don't get the guarantee of the maximum. It all depends on how much you put in. And with the pension plan too, when it comes to planning, you're allowed to take CPP early. So 65 is when you get the maximum benefit. That 1306 is what the max is now, but the average Canadian gets 60% of that. So normally you're in that $800, $900 range, but to take it at 60, it's a 36% discount. So it's really important to find your sweet spot when it comes to taking CPP If you delay it to 70, they add 42% to it. And remember, this is a guaranteed number for the rest of your life. More than likely, I'm not sure if all of you were told, but I was told when I was in school that this would not be here when I retired. So just so you know, Brian Mulrooney, back in his day, moved this money out of the tax base, because that's where this money used to go, and he started its own account, and governments couldn't touch it. So they can't build bridges, they can't build roads with it. And I think last year was at $165 billion, which is 75 years worth of room. So it's never going to run out. Your kids are going to have it. I hope they don't tell everyone still in high school that it won't be there when they retire. But knowing when to take it, 60, 65, or 70, really important planning tool here, because you don't really want to take that discount at 60. The older version of CPP, everyone took it early. And it was, I put money in and I want it back, is kind of the mentality. What we look at now is we want a guaranteed income and longevity. We talk about that. We're going to live to 90. We'd rather have you make sure your retirement income's looked after first before trying to get your money back. We do a lot of spreadsheets on this just to kind of give you an idea. If you took it at 60, or if you would have waited to 65, the over-under on that is 72 years old. So if you took it at 60 and lived past 72, you would have been better off to wait to 65. You would have had more money. So we do that for all our clients as well. Old age security, you just have to live in Canada for 40 years past the age of 18, and then you get this benefit, which has changed, just so you know. They used to have the same amount of money, and as soon as you turn 65, you qualify for it. Now, if you're over the age of 75, they've actually increased it. So hopefully some of you have seen that. And it's important to know too, on the planning tool, if you make and did a good job, did well in your life, and saved properly, if you make over the $80,000 in retirement income, old age security is really clawed back. So if you make over $80,000, they start taking 15 cents for every dollar. So people that have done well and did their job and saved for retirement sometimes get penalized. It's important to plan for this. In that year of death that Ted was talking about, and you had a huge income, and it's funny he talked about that. We do the same thing. You're better to die in January than you are in December. But if you died in December and you got that old age security, now all of a sudden if your income's over $200,000 or $140,000 because you had to cash all your assets in, your estate will be paying back that old age security, which is usually, nobody seems to remember that until the government says, send me back $7,200. GIS doesn't get talked a lot about. It's guaranteed income supplement. It's based on low income earners. If you're single and make $20,000 or less, you can qualify for it. Married couples at $27,000. The one thing that gets missed here is when they're calculating this income, it's not based on your income tax, because when you pay income tax, you have to pay tax on CPP and old age security, even though they give it to you. We subtract old age security money from this calculation for GIS. The government finally has clued in, and they actually are going to start sending GIS money to people that are in the low income number without applying for it. So the old way, you had to apply to GIS to get it. The new way, and I don't know if it's this year or next year, but there's new statements coming out telling people if they're going to qualify for GIS, which is great, because the old way, most people missed it. That's why I have it highlighted in yellow, but it's really important that the government does do this, because if you qualify, you should get it, but a lot of people just missed it because they looked at their income tax, and when I made $21,000, I don't qualify, but you have to subtract old age security, so you might have been at $14,000, which means you'd be qualified for the GIS. It's added into your old age security. Talk about RIFs and lifts. Obviously, when you're putting money into an RSP, it's tax deductible to your income, and then when you withdraw it, it's 100% taxable. The one thing to understand too on the lift side, an RSP turns into a RIF. A LIRA, locked-in retirement account, which is legislated by the government, is usually a pension you moved into a financial institution, and it turns into a LIF. The government makes you move these into these programs because they're called income funds. You have to do it at 71 because the government wants their money back. So they want to tax this money now as you're in retirement. The one thing to understand about a LIF is when you move it from a LIRA to a LIF, the government allows you to unlock 50% of that and move it into a RIF. So we do this for every client of ours. They do not take all the money into LIRA and keep 100% in a LIF. We unlock it. And the reason we do that, a LIF and RIF, they have minimums that you have to take every year, but a LIF has a maximum you can take, where a RIF doesn't. So we call it Plan Z. We never know when we might need money. If all your money is in a LIF, you can't say, I just put a new roof on my house, I need $20,000. You're not allowed to do that in a LIF. You can only take the maximum. I have some numbers on there. At 71, the minimum you have to withdraw is 5.28% out of your RIF and or LIF. How they determine that number is what's in that account on December 31st. Multiplied by the percentage, that's how they come up with the minimum. As you get older, these percentages grow. But in theory, as you keep taking more money out, your total money in the account is coming down. So it tends to change your income. If you get paid your RIF and LIF payment before January 15th, you won't know until February that the number has changed. So we're frantically doing that now with everyone in retirement because it's changing and they want to know why. And it's always, we have to go by the December 31st statement. And as you can see, when you get up to 95, the minimum is 20%. So you're running out of money at that time in your RIF as you got to pull out a lot of money. In retirement, when we talk about making sure your investments are set up properly, we use what we call a cash wedge for all our clients. When we're projecting on how much money we need to pull out of every investment, let's just call it $25,000 a year if you had $500,000 in all your buckets. We make sure $50,000 of that, 2 years of money we need to send you, is in cash. So when you have a market like you had last year, you're never pulling money out of a down market or a down fund. So it's important that we always set up. 2008 was worse because we had a bigger drop and you were pulling money out of an income fund at that time. It takes a lot longer to get back if you're pulling units out of that fund. So we set up everybody this way. The rest of your investments, the $450,000, is invested at your risk tolerance. And basically your risk tolerance, there's conservative, moderate aggressive, and aggressive. Really, when it comes to risk, what we like to explain it is what can you stomach it going down, not how much it's going to grow. So it's all about what goes down because you have to sleep at night. It's your money. You got to make sure you're comfortable with that level. So we had a few people last year, obviously, with the market coming down, and we had a few people call to say, I need to go to cash. But we're here to help control those emotions, but you can't just look at 1 year and kind of go, oh, I got to change everything. It should be your entire retirement time needs to be set up this way. If you retire at 65 and you get to, and we're going to project you to 90, we need 25 years of growth to make sure we're giving you enough money in retirement. So some of the questions we get is when I retire, should I move everything to conservative money? We don't like to do that because it's not going to grow with inflation. The only time we allow it is if they have way too much money, right? So if they know for sure in retirement their money is going to last them throughout their lifetime, sometimes it's okay, but we're always trying to make sure that the money's growing and it's growing at a faster rate of inflation. Some estate, Ted touched on this. When we do financial planning, when you're growing up and you're working, you're always looking at last year's taxes. RSPs, last year's taxes. I want to get money back or I want to reduce my tax liability. When you get to retirement, we need to change our thought process on this. What we try to do when you retire and you look and project to the time you're going to die at 90 or to get to the moon, what we look at is an average tax rate that you're going to pay from now until that time. not try and keep the lowest you can keep. It's really important here because what we do is move money out of RIFs and lifts, even though you don't get to spend it. We move it into tax-free savings accounts and or non-registered accounts. So we're getting money through the tax system so you don't have what Ted was talking about when you die prematurely or die at a certain age, and if you have a lot of money inside your registered RIFs and lifts and you're the last spouse, Ted talked about the spousal rollover. So if you're married, all your RIFs and lifts get transferred over to your spouse, and that's a tax-free event. But if you're the last spouse that's still alive and you want to move money to a generation, your kids, 100% of that money is taxed 1 minute before you die. We had a client that wanted us to talk to his father. His mom passed away 8 years ago. She was 70, and he didn't need any money. And he had $600,000 in a RIF, so he was just taking the minimum. He didn't need the money. He didn't really travel. He was just had the house paid for, met with his buddies at Tim Hortons, and that's it. But he wasn't moving any money through the tax system. Unfortunately, he died at 75 with $600,000 in his RIF, and our poor client had to send a check to the CRA for $280,000. So when we're looking at planning, first we want to make sure your retirement is looked after. And as all of you know in this room, retirement is a process. There's stages of retirement. When you finish work, and it's like, what do I do? Do I have enough money? And then there's emotions that come through that. I used to be well known, now I'm just at home and meeting with 2 buddies. There's emotions through that. So we always try to make sure that we let our clients retire for a couple of years, make sure the income they're getting is comfortable, they don't need any more money. And then we get into estate planning, and that's when we start moving this money through the tax system and try and get it set up for your beneficiaries. Mind you, we do have people that say, when I die, I want my last check to bounce. And then we have people that try to make sure they want as much money to go to their kids. It's all a preference. It's not, I'm not going to tell one way's better than the other. It usually depends on what your parents did for you, and that's where people get it. So I always like to tell people, if you are gifting money to your kids, it's important to also tell them that you expect the same for their kids. So I always like to make sure, because if I'm giving money to my kids and my grandkids are going to get nothing, I might hold back and not give it to them. I might give it to my grandkids then. So it's just a matter of how you feel and how you look at it. We always Ted talked about the probate cost of 1.5%. We call that the small tax. When we look at RIF and lifts and your estate tax at 53.53%, we try to make sure we're looking after the big tax, not the little tax, right? But all our questions is always about probate fees. How do I hide that? How do I hide this? All about 1.5%. And that's just an updated tax chart. As you can see, if you make over $221,000 in a year, your tax rate is 53.53%. And it's important. Our motto at our office is, it's not what you make, it's what you keep. So we don't do weird things and illegal things to save you on taxes. We use the tax rules to our advantage to make sure you pay the least amount of tax. We talked about the tax-free savings account, where this is what we use in retirement. I would say 90% of all our clients, we move money each year from different accounts into the tax-free savings account. So in retirement, we're not expecting you to come up with the money out of your pocket. Sometimes we're just putting an extra $8,000 or $9,000 through your RIF to pay tax on it, to get it moved into the tax-free savings account. We would have preferred it called a tax-free investing account, but the bank lobby is a little bigger than the rest of us, and it was called a tax-free savings account. And a lot of people think you have to have it at a bank. You don't. It can be invested in anything you like. Stocks, bonds, mutual funds, your risk. It doesn't have to be a bank account earning a very small interest rate. It can be something that's more aggressive or actually invested in something. So we make sure in most of our clients' cases, this is the most aggressive asset that they have because it's growing tax-free. Currently, I know when they came out in 2009, it wasn't a big deal, $5,000. Everyone said, well, what's that? That's just ridiculous. Well, here we are 14 years later. Now the lifetime limit is $88,000 that you can contribute to a tax-free savings account. And or if you keep it updated, we just moved from $6,000 a year to $6,500 that you can put in. We were aggressively doing this in the last couple of weeks with the market down. It's great to move money into a tax-free savings account when the market's down, because when it grows, you don't have to pay tax on it. If your tax-free savings account is full, that's great. But now where do we go? Well, now we call it a non-registered account. Some people call it an open or investment account. But what we do find with most of our clients that have never had one before, it's really important to understand how taxation works with the three different income streams: interest, dividends, and capital gains. Interest in a non-registered account is 100% taxable. If you have a bank account, you probably get a T3 or T5. That's that small amount that you get every year that says you made $32.05. That's fully taxable. Okay? And it's fully taxable in a non-registered account. If you have a vehicle that pays dividends, you're actually only paying 67% tax. And if it's in a vehicle that creates a capital gain, you're only paying 50% tax. So when you have these vehicles inside a tax-free savings account and an RSP, it doesn't matter. Everything that comes out of an RSP or a RIF is taxable. It doesn't matter what the income stream is. In non-registered, it's very important to know what you're invested in, because it's all taxed differently. There's other options in non-registered that I don't want to get too deep in, but there's funds called corporate class that actually have deferred capital gains in it. And then there's another series that you're allowed to use, is called return of capital. And the return of capital series of funds actually sends your money back first. So your estate will pay more taxes, but you don't have to pay the tax this year. I'm going to come back to this slide because I'm going to have Ted come up just to talk about some of these conversations. We always like to make sure anytime our first meeting that we meet with any client, the first question we ask is, do you have a will or a power of attorney? Very important. Ted talked about, we always ask for your wills and powers of attorney because we have to check the wills and powers of attorney to make sure the beneficiaries that are in that will kind of match what we have. You don't want to say, I want all my RIF money, like Ted said, to go to my kids, and then over here it's to somebody else. So it's just confusion. So we always ask for that. I'm going to have him come back up shortly, and we'll talk about these questions that we get a lot about trying to hide that 1.5% probate tax. One question we do get, I did talk about, moving your money to a conservative fund when you retire. Like I said, we don't like to do that because you have hopefully 25 years of retirement before we have to do that. Ted talked about charitable giving. It's another great way that you get to kind of reduce your estate taxes, and it's a very good program. The benefit obviously goes to the estate, but really, when you're looking at planning, it's really important to know the whole 25 years and what your income at death will be, so you understand what you just gave to the CRA, right?
Are you going to talk about, should I add my kids to the account? Okay.
I am. I'm going to have Ted come back. I'll come back to that, Herb, because it is something that we do see, yeah, and questions we get. So I'll come back because we just thought we'd have a quick panel discussion at the end. And just when it comes to the planning part, we always hope that you have the proper asset allocations of what your risk is. It's important to be rebalanced. So hopefully your financial person is doing that for you, or in a portfolio that automatically does that. What that really means is if you're a moderate investor, 60% of your asset will be in a we call it equity, which is stocks. The other 40% would be in what we call an interest-bearing product, could be bonds or GICs. But as the market changes, that 60-40 also changes. So if the market takes off, you could think you're 60-40, but really you're 70-30. So now you've moved into moderate aggressive. If you don't rebalance that and the market goes down, you'll get hurt more than you should. We don't ever change risk tolerance. Again, it's your risk, not my risk. We look at all the buckets when you're looking at this planning. Liquidation order is very important. So when we put these plans together and we show you all these buckets, and you need the $25,000 a year, well, should it come from my RIF, my LIF, my TFSA, my non-registered account? Where should that money come from? So we look at it where we try to make sure that we're level from 65 to 90 in the tax world. So it's important to know that liquidation order, and the government tends to change rules, so we have to change with it. But one thing I find, if you do have good financial advice, we are, at our office, people call and say, I need $5,000, where should it come from? If you're doing it on your own, you go to the bank and say, I need $5,000, and they just pull it out of your tax-free savings account. Maybe it would have been better to pull out of your RIF. I don't know the answer to that question. But it's very, very common to see that people pull too much money out of fully taxable income instead of pulling maybe out of the tax-free savings account. It all depends on where you fit in the tax bracket, and that's why you need help. And then if you haven't taken CPP and old age security, obviously, really knowing that sweet spot and where to take it is very, very important. I just thought I'd throw up a picture of one of our plans. You can see all the different colors. That's the liquidation order and where we're pulling money from. In this case, the couple, they're at 108%, so they've told us what they needed monthly. We've projected them to 90, and now we know the liquidation order to minimize that tax. You are noticing the line that goes up, that's called inflation. So if you need $10,000 a month today, in 20 years from now, it's not 10,000, it's more like 17,000. So we project that as well. So a good financial plan will have built-in rates of return that are very conservative, and also inflation. And this is my favorite one, just don't do it by yourself. It gets complicated. It's like Ted said, don't try and do your wills and powers of attorney off something that's online for $29.95. There's too many questions and not enough understanding of your current situation. It's the same in the financial world. We need to know exactly what's happening and be forthcoming. I'm going to bring Ted back up just so we can talk about the beneficiary stuff.